Here in the cottage garden, there's no better candidate for a late autumn flush than the Aster. This one is Thompsoni nana, about 45 centimetres high, and a good blooming candidate with those classic Aster flowers, lavender blue stars. You can see why it has that wonderful origin of being associated with twinkling stars in the sky, which in fact is where the plant gets its name from. And there's a whole bevy of them. Don't be fearful of too many of the Asters. If you stick with the more species-orientated ones, then they tend to be mildew and wilt resistant. And it was the mildew and wilt that was really affecting all of those Michaelmas daisies, typical of the sort of plants that you would have been seeing in Granny's garden years ago. A good example of the way that plants are being reclassified is with the group of Asters, because although these look like Asters, they flower like Asters, they're no longer classified as Asters, because in 1994 botanists started to play around with the genetics of these plants, understand them better, and realised that actually they're not even related closely to the Aster. So you might find some of these plants classified under other genera. As a broad rule, if it's from Europe or Asia, it's still called an Aster. However, if it's from North America, all those wonderful prairie plants, this is one of them, Little Carlo, then it's reclassified as Symphotrichum. And there's a whole bevy of them, about 90 species moved into that particular genus. Now, Little Carlo will top out at around about 90 centimetres. It's a cordifolious species type, and in fact, there's a white form there, which is called silver spray, the name suggesting exactly the type of flowers that it has. Some of the Asters are really useful in really quite difficult spaces in the garden. For instance, this one, Diviricatus. Look at those twisting purple wiry stems and then star-like blooms on the tips. It's a fab plant to use if you want it tumbling over something like a dry stone wall, or, as we've got it here, going up through a Rosa glauca, where its scandent nature will assist in twining with the stems. It'll mix in spring when the rose is in full bloom, and then come autumn it's the Aster that will all be attracted to. This, incidentally, was Gertrude Jekyll's favourite Aster, for fairly obvious reasons. But there's also ones that you can play with on the edge. Ericoides prostrata, snowflurry, for instance, down there I'm using as an edger. Wonderful white mounds. And this one is Lateriflorus prince. Now, it's quite an interesting grower because it has these horizontal branches, and then on the tips of these, flurries of more wine-coloured blooms. Again, very small, but perfect with the, not just the flower colour, but the foliage colour against slightly lighter coloured specimens like the corylus here. And if you get the chance, stick them in groups of 3s and 5s, because whilst all of this broad group that we call Asters are vigorous going up, they're less vigorous in terms of spreading. So put them in tight clumps, and then as you knit other herbaceous perennials around, you'll find the whole garden just becomes a mound of blooms, these blooming right through until Christmas.